Yep.
But I'm glad I wore a chunky heel and not a skinny one. I'd be in trouble right now. Good afternoon. I'm Victoria Sullivan. I live on Manchester's south side with my husband and 2 sons. I'm honored to have been asked to speak at this incredible event. I had the honor of representing the good folks of Hillsborough District 16 for 4 years in the New Hampshire House of Representatives. During my time in the New Hampshire House, I sponsored several pieces of legislation that have become law. However, one piece of legislation that I had a personal stake in never made it to the governor's desk. That legislation would have allowed a person who was struggling with addiction the ability to turn in any illicit drugs or paraphernalia to a place agreed upon by their city or town and be placed on a path to recovery without facing charges for possession. It would have allowed them to get any drugs in their possession out of their homes or off of the streets. It would have allowed a parent who discovered their child was using to remove the drugs from their home and get their child's help. The first year I introduced the bill, I made it through the House, but it was killed in the Senate. Later that year, my own family, like so many others, was directly affected by the opioid epidemic. My sister lost her stepson to an overdose. My nephew had been in a fight for his life for many years. He got clean many times. At the time of his death, he had a good job. He had his own apartment. And his family thought that the addiction was behind him. As is the case with many people struggling with addiction, he put on a good act for his family while he struggled in the darkness. Like so many who succumb to this disease, he left behind a child who will have to try to make sense of this loss. It was very difficult for me to see that a bill that I knew could save lives died before becoming law. That bill may have been ahead of its time, but I'm hopeful that minds and hearts are changing as we embrace new paths to pull people up and out of addiction. I think it's become clear that we're never going to arrest our way out of this epidemic. In the meantime, we're losing loved ones to a horrific demon. In a documentary I recently watched regarding this crisis, part of which was filmed right here in this park, a gentleman said, "If heroin is the devil, fentanyl is the 4th horse of the apocalypse." When we seek empathy for those who are struggling with addiction, the conversation needs to encompass those who are left behind. The children, the parents, the sisters, the brothers. Not only of those who have lost their lives, but those who have lost their freedom. We find hope within our community. The people who have chosen to care for other people's children, who are providing a loving home as foster parents, or who have adopted children, giving these children stability, many for the first time in their young lives. Understanding and help for the grandparents who are finding themselves raising their grandchildren. These have been very difficult times for so many people, and addiction is merciless and undiscriminating, and we have become united by loss. We cannot bring back loved ones who we have lost, but we can help those working toward a new start in life. In the midst of despair, pain, and mourning, we have found some hope in the First Step Act. The First Step Act is a first step toward putting families back together, to giving people a second chance at life. This is a chance for families to become whole again, for children to be reunited with their parents. Rehabilitation and re-entry will only be successful if we as a community embrace the efforts of those taking this first step. We need to make sure there are jobs, housing, and education to support people as they put their lives back together. Manchester has been called ground zero in the opioid epidemic. That has also provided Manchester with the opportunity to be innovators in the fight toward recovery. Chris Hickey and the Manchester Fire Department created Safe Stations as a way to help people when they needed it. Safe Stations have been recognized nationally for the life-saving services it provides. I believe that Manchester can also lead when it comes to the First Step Act. Just as this bill was the first step in criminal justice reform, empathy is the first step towards stronger communities. As the largest city in the state, we have an enormous amount of resources available to us. We need to work together with our business leaders, our education leaders, and our faith leaders to continue the path of recovery, rehabilitation, and hope. The more conversations that we have, the more opportunity we have to educate people on reform, recovery, and reentry. It is my prayer that our darkest days of this opioid epidemic are behind us, that help is more available daily, and that empathy and understanding towards all members of our community are growing through conversations like the ones that we are having here today. Thank you.